What's up, my fellow self-help junkies? In this video, I'm going to be going over my book notes for the first part of Lori Gottlieb's book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. Got this book from the library. Get a lot of my books from the library. So let's go over my notes. First of all, I wanted to talk about how I found out about Lori Gottlieb. I mean, it's obviously one of the most popular self-help books out right now, or nonfiction books, I should say. I don't know if it's really self-help. Depends on how you look at it. But I found out about Lori Gottlieb. She went on the James Altucher show, the podcast I listen to. And she's famous from Dear Therapist columns that she writes. But she went on there to promote the book. And so I thought she was very interesting because she's a therapist. And she talked about being in therapy and being a therapist and also going to therapy herself. And then I figured out that this book came out. And so I decided to read it. Because I've been in therapy myself and I'm kind of interested in learning more about how therapists operate, and we all kind of are, but you can't really break that wall when you're in the therapy. So this book is about it's basically about her life, but since she's a therapist, it's about what it's like being a therapist and what it's like going to therapy, but it's also the things that she goes through in her life. And like one of the most interesting things that I found out in here is that she didn't become a therapist till later in life. Before that, she was like a producer in TV, and she was on ER and Friends, but she wasn't really fulfilled by that. And then she started, like when she was on the show ER, she was more interested in the medical side, and she thought she would be a better doctor, but she ended up doing therapy instead. And I'm sure the book's gonna go more into that because I'm through the first part. It's split into parts. I'm through part one, but it's interesting how, people can change careers, but a lot of us, myself included, we're not necessarily fulfilled by our certain career, and we always think there's going to be something better somewhere else. But you kind of find this in-between space, because with her, she thought it would be therapy, but it's really her writing. She writes a lot, and she lets her patients know that. Like I learned on the podcast, that writing is her true passion. So you kind of have to find this mixture of things that's going to fulfill you. Before, she thought it was maybe the TV writing. It wasn't that. Maybe it was being a doctor. It wasn't that. It's a mixture of both. So that's like the first notes that I have that I thought was pretty interesting that she gave insight into. And it's also it also just gives motivation to people, and hopefully you out there, to pursue what you think is right. And even as you're pursuing what you think is right, you might not find the perfect thing. It might have to be a mixture. You might have to keep on changing things up. And another note that I have here is that I've been in therapy myself before, and I thought I knew a lot about therapy, but I learned a lot more from this book. I thought I knew like some of the most basic things, but there's a lot of things that I didn't know, and there's like therapist talk that she refers to. And one of the things she talks about is like it's really important for a therapist and a patient to bond. Like, the patient should be able to take criticism, but there still has to be a bond there. And I didn't really think that was like something that therapists considered. I thought that they always think that, a patient should be able to go to any therapist, but she says that it has to be like a true bond, and that a therapist should be able to bond with the patient. So I thought that was interesting, because I thought it was more of like a doctor thing where it's like they have to see you no matter what, and you should be able to last it out no matter what. But even though I say that, and I've been to like a therapist I really didn't mesh with, and I didn't stay with him. So it was just kind of good to hear that, and interesting to know that. Another interesting note that I had in here was that therapists apparently can, and some of them do, go to like group therapy or a group of therapists where they discuss their patients to get like a different view, to make sure that they're being unbiased in their treatment, because sometimes you can bring your own history into treating a patient. And that's something interesting to think about, that therapists are actually like making sure that they provide the best therapy and not just, approaching it like a regular day job, even though it is a regular day job. And she does talk about that, how she's a normal person. And that's something else to know, is that throughout the book, she discusses her own problem. And the biggest problem in part one is a breakup with her boyfriend, and it really shows a personal side of her, and that therapists are real people and they have their own issues just like us. and their own blind spots that they're not able to see, just like us. So that was pretty interesting as well. And just a general thing I wanted to say is that this book is for people, I feel it's for people that are considering going to therapy or in therapy and want to maybe see if they're seeing the right therapist, or maybe somebody that's considering therapy as their career, because it gives a lot of cool insights into therapy, not only as a patient but as a therapist themselves. It's a lot of cool insights. And one of the basic things that she covers right off the bat is that people go to therapy oftentimes for something called a presenting problem, but there's usually something more. And the example she gives is like her breaking up with her boyfriend, right? That is a presenting problem. And when she went in there, she wants to tell the therapist, here's the story of why I broke up with my boyfriend. And she's hoping that he'll just side with her and say, yeah, your boyfriend's a scumbag and you're cured and you're all done. But so many times in our lives, it's not that presenting problem. There's something else deeper there. And that's what she talks about. The presenting problem is why we go to therapy. But then there's usually something more. There's usually history, like the breakup. She could have seen it coming for other reasons. But there's usually a reason people go to therapy. But then there's a lot more behind that. And on that, like going to therapy, why people go to therapy and who goes to therapy. There's one thing that she said in here was like there's certain personalities that go to therapy, and there's different personality disorders. There's like type A personality disorders, which are like schizophrenic type people, type B, which are like things like narcissistic and borderline personality, and then there's type C that are more antisocial, avoidant. And it's usually the type B people that'll go to therapy. And the reason that is because they're extroverted. So like they're outspoken and they seek feedback. They're not necessarily able to change their behaviors, but they've been through destroyed relationships and they seek guidance, and they do this outwardly. Where the other personality types, like a schizophrenic person, they're more like out of control of their own mind. And a type C are antisocial, so they're not going to go external to find a solution. And I thought that was pretty interesting to hear that part about the personality disorders and which ones, and how it's like only a certain percentage of Americans that are going to actually go to a therapist. That part kind of blew my mind. And another term that she used here was like a high functioning patient, which is like when therapists, they refer a patient to another therapist. They say whether the person's high functioning, and this means like the person's not a mess and that they can actually observe their own behavior and potentially make changes from it, versus somebody that's just like going to come in and be all wacky or just cry or just blame the world. Like those aren't high functioning people. And along those lines, she goes through her patients in this book, through a number of patients, which is pretty interesting because therapy is very personal. She doesn't say the names necessarily, like the full names, but some of the patients she has aren't high functioning people. So she gives insights into what it's like to treat them and just the different personalities. Like one guy is just this total narcissistic type guy. But I won't give away too much because I want to leave some for you if you decide to read it. But she does go over patients as well, her personal life, her professional life, sort of her whole life in general in this book. And it's very interesting to anybody interested in therapy or just a good nonfiction read. But I think it's also self-help as well, because you learn so much about how therapists approach problems and how you could potentially use it to help yourself. So those are my book notes for the first part of Lori Gottlieb's book. Maybe you should talk to someone. Make sure to subscribe and like this video. Thanks for watching.